So am I the jerk for dismantling my family's business to save it from my own brother? For a decade, I was the engine of that company, the guy who turned blueprints into buildings, while he was the self-proclaimed visionary. But when his vision turned into a self-inflicted catastrophe that threatened to bankrupt us all, I had a choice: go down with the ship he captained onto the rocks, or build a lifeboat for myself and everyone who actually deserved to be saved. He called it betrayal. I called it a long overdue course correction. You be the judge. For 10 years, my world smelled like sawdust, fresh concrete and diesel exhaust. My name is Zachary, and from the time I was 22, I was the operational heart of Miller & Sons Construction. The name was a bit of a misnomer. It was really Miller & Son singular. Me, my younger brother Owen, was the other son, but his primary contribution was generating what he called disruptive ideas during our Monday morning meetings, ideas that usually involved some impossible architecture or a new age material that cost more per square foot than the entire project's budget. He had our father's charm, and a vocabulary lifted straight from a venture capital pitch deck. What he didn't have was a single practical skill. He couldn't read a structural load report. He thought a Gantt chart was a type of fish, and the one time I asked him to balance a simple petty cash ledger, he somehow ended up listing a box of donuts as a depreciable asset. He called it his creative mind. I called it weaponized incompetence. Our father, Thomas, enabled it. He saw in Owen the charismatic frontman he'd always wanted to be. He saw me, with my calloused hands and my preference for spreadsheets over schmoozing, as the reliable, unglamorous cog in the machine. A necessary part, sure, but boring, replaceable. Owen was the brand. I was just the labor. For a decade, I swallowed it. I swallowed it when Owen's vision for a high-end kitchen remodel resulted in him ordering custom Italian marble with the wrong dimensions, a $20,000 mistake I had to absorb by renegotiating with our lumber supplier. I swallowed it when he schmoozed a potential client at the golf course and promised them a 3-month build timeline for a project that would realistically take 7, leaving me to manage the client's explosive anger when reality set in. Each time, I cleaned up the mess. I'd work the weekends, smooth things over with the subcontractors, rejig the finances, and pull another rabbit out of the hat. And each time, Owen would give me that same sheepish grin and say, crisis averted. Good thing you're here to handle the details, big brother. My brain just isn't wired for that stuff. Then he'd go off to a long lunch, and my father would clap me on the shoulder and say, "That's what family is for, Zach. We cover for each other." The problem was, the covering always went in one direction. The biggest project of our company's history was the Pinnacle Point development. It was a multi-million-dollar deal to build a boutique hotel and retail complex on a prime piece of waterfront land. It was the kind of project that could elevate us from a respectable local firm to a major regional player. It was my baby. I'd spent 6 months working on the bid, cross-referencing material costs, lining up the best crews, and creating a logistical plan that was a work of art in its own right. Owen's contribution was designing the logo for the presentation folder and suggesting we include a rooftop Zen garden, which I politely ignored. We won the contract. The investors were impressed not by the Zen garden, but by the meticulous, day-by-day feasibility of my plan. Of course, at the celebration dinner, my father toasted Owen for his unflinching vision that brought us this victory. I just sat there, swirling the cheap champagne in my glass, and smiled. Responsibility for filing the primary development and zoning permits was delegated. My father, in a moment of what he called mentorship, gave the job to Owen. "It's time he learned some of the nuts and bolts, Zach," he'd said, ignoring my deep, visceral unease. "It's a simple process. He can handle it." I knew he couldn't. This wasn't like forgetting to order paper for the printer. This was a labyrinth of city codes, environmental impact statements, and public hearing notification. It required precision, patience, and a deep-seated fear of bureaucratic consequences. Owen possessed none of these things. He saw it as boring paperwork, a task beneath a creative. I tried to check in. "Hey, how's the Pinnacle Point paperwork going?" I'd ask. He'd wave a dismissive hand. "Almost done, man. Just waiting on a call back from some guy in zoning. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I knew you didn't wait for a call back. You went down there. You stood in line. You talked to the clerks. You learned their names. You made sure your file was on the top of the pile. But I was told to back off, to let him have this responsibility, so I did, outwardly. The first mistake came about 8 weeks ago. It was a minor preliminary soil survey submission, a formality, really, but one with a hard deadline. Owen missed it by a day. It wasn't a catastrophe, it just meant a small fine, and a 2-week delay on that specific preliminary step. When I found out, I went to his office. The form was sitting right there on his desk, unsigned, next to a catalog for high-end office furniture. He'd been shopping for a new chair. He gave me the classic Owen shrug. Oh man, did I forget to send that? It must have slipped my mind. I was just so swamped with the branding concepts for the hotel lobby. That was the moment the ground shifted beneath my feet, not because of the mistake itself, but because of the look in his eyes. It was a placid, untroubled look. He wasn't concerned. He wasn't even apologetic. He just expected me to fix it. And as I stood there, looking at that useless form, a decade of resentment didn't just simmer. It flash froze into something cold and hard. This wasn't just incompetence anymore. It was a profound, almost spiritual disrespect for my work, for my life, for the very foundations of the business that fed him. He was a parasite, and for the first time, I saw him not as my foolish younger brother, but as a clear and present danger to my future. That night, I didn't fix his mistake. I went home, opened my laptop, and incorporated Miller Built Solutions, LLC. I spent the next 2 weeks on the phone with a lawyer, transferring my personal savings into a new business account, and quietly, meticulously, replicating the entire Pinnacle Point permit application package. I used the same architectural plans, the same engineering reports, the same environmental studies, all of which I had created or commissioned myself. But on every single signature line, where it once said Miller & Sons, it now said Miller Built Solutions. I went down to the city planning office myself, spoke with the head inspector, a man I'd known for years, and filed the entire, correct and complete package under my own company's name. It was approved within a week. The official permit was issued and mailed to my home address, not the office. It sat in my desk drawer, a ticking time bomb. Last month, the final deadline for the Miller & Sons application passed, and just as I knew he would, Owen came to me, his face pale, his hands trembling. The investors had called, wanting confirmation that the permits were secured before releasing the first 7-figure wire transfer. The city had sent a final damning letter of rejection, citing a complete failure to file. The project was, for all intents and purposes, dead. Our family business was facing not just the loss of the biggest contract in its history, but likely a lawsuit from the investors for breach of contract and misrepresentation. We were on the hook for millions in preliminary expenses, with no path forward. We were facing bankruptcy. He stood in my office, wringing his hands, the picture of panic. "Zach, I think I messed up," he stammered. "All the permits. I thought I had more time. They changed the deadlines. Or something. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. But you can fix this, right? You can call your guy at the city. You can pull some strings. You always fix this." For 10 years, my response would have been a tired sigh, a rubbing of my temples, and the words, "Okay, Owen, I'll handle it." But this time was different. I looked at him, at the manufactured helplessness in his eyes, at the man-child who had coasted on my sweat for his entire adult life. And all that cold hard resolve that had been forming for weeks finally surfaced. I didn't shout. I didn't lecture him. I just smiled. A calm, quiet, genuine smile. I reached into my desk, pulled out a sticky note, and wrote down a phone number. I slid it across the desk to him. He looked at it, confused. "What's this?" That I said, my voice even, and low as the direct line, "For Clark Peters, the chief city inspector. He's expecting a call. He needs someone from Miller & Sons to officially explain why the Pinnacle Point project is in default." I leaned back in my chair. "You also have to call Dad, and then you have to call the investors. You need to explain to them why your name, and your name alone, is on all the project management correspondence for the permit application that was just rejected." His face crumpled. The panic gave way to a dawning, horrified understanding. My name? But you were overseeing it. You're the COO. No, Owen, I said, the smile never leaving my face. I was told to let you handle it. This was your responsibility, your moment to learn the nuts and bolts. So learn. I stood up and walked to the door. Good luck with those calls. I have some work to do. He didn't know the half of it. The work I had to do was on the Pinnacle Point project, which was very much alive and well, fully permitted, and ready to break ground, under the sole ownership of a company he had never even heard of. My company. The silence that followed my departure from the office was, I imagine, deafening. For the rest of the afternoon, I didn't receive a single call, no panic text from Owen, no furious summons from my father. It was an eerie quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. I knew they were scrambling, trying to understand the depth of the hole they were in. They were probably huddled in my father's office, Owen spinning his web of excuses, my father trying to figure out which of his old-timer contacts at the city he could call to smooth things over, not yet realizing that this wasn't a problem that could be solved with a handshake and a promise. This was a terminal diagnosis. My resolve didn't come from a single moment of anger, but from a slow decade-long burn. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, 1,000 moments of being taken for granted. I remembered being 24, just a couple of years into the business. We were building a custom home for a wealthy client. Owen, in his capacity as design consultant, decided at the last minute that the living room needed a vaulted ceiling, 2 feet higher than the one on the approved architectural plans. He didn't tell me. He told the framing crew directly, charming them with his confidence. It was a catastrophic change. It threw off the roofline, invalidated the HVAC plan, and violated a local height ordinance. I found out when a neighbor called the city to complain about the structure suddenly towering over their property line. A stop work order was slapped on the site. The client was furious. My father was furious. But who did he yell at? Me. Zachary, how could you let this happen? You're supposed to be managing the site. I tried to explain that Owen had gone behind my back, that this was a direct result of his impulsiveness. My father just waved his hand dismissively. Your brother is a creative. He sees the big picture. It's your job to make his vision work. You're the practical one. Now fix it. Fixing it meant 3 sleepless nights with an architect and an engineer, redesigning the entire roof structure. It meant a groveling apology to the client, along with a 10% discount on the final price that came directly out of our already thin profit margin. It meant me, personally, on site with the crew, recutting and reframing the disaster, my hands raw and my back screaming in protest. And Owen? He took a long weekend to go to a design conference in Aspen. When he returned, tanned and smiling, he saw the corrected roofline, and said, "See? I knew it would look better. Great job making it happen, bro." He never once acknowledged the chaos he had caused, the money he had lost, or the sleep I had sacrificed. He just saw his vision realized, and that's all that mattered. Then there was the payroll incident. Owen was supposed to handle the transition to a new digital payroll system. He called it optimizing our workflow. For weeks he assured me and my father that everything was on track. The day before payday, the system crashed. It turned out he'd never actually completed the data migration. He just clicked a few buttons and assumed the software would do the rest. 65 employees, many living paycheck to paycheck, were about to get nothing. I found out at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night when our foreman, a man named Miguel who had been with my father for 30 years, called me in a quiet panic. His guys were asking if there was a problem. I spent the entire night at the office with our bookkeeper, for a woman named Maria, who Owen treated like his personal assistant. We manually processed every single paycheck, cross-referencing timesheets with old paper records, and cutting physical checks one by one. I drove to the bank at 6 a.m. the next morning, and used my own personal line of credit to cover the full amount, praying the funds would clear in time. By 8 a.m. I was on our job sites, handing out the checks myself, apologizing for the glitch in the new system. Owen rolled in around 10, holding a smoothie. "Heard we had a little hiccup," he said cheerfully. "Good thing you're a night owl, Zach. All sorted?" My father praised him later for taking the initiative to upgrade our technology.
because in his mind, the idea was more important than the execution. These flashbacks weren't just memories, they were exhibits in the case I was building in my own mind. Each one was a brick in the wall that was slowly, methodically, cutting me off from the sense of familial obligation that had been my prison for so long. The catalyst, the moment that turned passive resentment into active strategy, was that stupid unsigned soil survey form. It was the triviality of it. He hadn't failed at some grand, complex task. He'd failed at the simplest, most basic act of responsibility, and he did it because he was busy indulging his own vanity. In that moment, I saw the future with horrifying clarity. This project, the Pinnacle Point development, was too big. The numbers were too large. A mistake wouldn't mean a 10% discount, or me fronting a week's payroll. It would mean total irreversible ruin, and he was going to make that mistake. It was an absolute certainty. I couldn't stop him, because I wasn't allowed to. My father had made that clear, so I had to stop the consequences from destroying me along with him. My resolve hardened into a plan. It wasn't just about getting the permits for myself. That was reactive. I needed to be proactive. I needed to build an entirely separate, viable, and superior alternative to Miller and Sons. I started by looking at the company's real assets. It wasn't the trucks which were aging. It wasn't the brand name which in the local contracting community was becoming synonymous with Owen's flakiness. The real asset was the people. It was Miguel, the foreman who could look at a piece of raw land and see every potential drainage problem. It was Sarah, the office manager who quietly ran interference for Owen's administrative blunders and knew every supplier and city clerk by name. It was the core group of carpenters, electricians and plumbers, who stayed with us not because of the pay, which was merely competitive, but because they trusted me. They trusted that I would have the materials on site when they needed them, that the plans I gave them were accurate, and that I would never ever ask them to do something unsafe or stupid just to satisfy a whim.
My first call wasn't to a lawyer, but to a friend. David Chen and I had been through engineering school together. While I had gone into the family business, he'd gone to law school, and now specialized in corporate and contract law. I met him for a beer at a quiet bar far from my usual haunts. I laid out the whole story, the decade of incompetence, my father's willful blindness, the looming disaster of Pinnacle Point. I expected him to tell me I was crazy, to warn me about the legal and familial implications of what I was contemplating. Instead, he just listened, nodding slowly. When I was finished, he took a long sip of his beer and looked at me. "Zach," he said, "I've been representing guys like you for 15 years. The workhorse, the one who actually makes the thing go, while the family name on the door gets all the credit and reaps all the rewards. I see it in manufacturing, in restaurants, in tech startups. It's a classic story." He leaned forward. "The only question is whether the workhorse is willing to leave the stable before it burns down." David's validation was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. He wasn't just my friend. He was an expert confirming that my situation wasn't just a personal grievance. It was a recognized pathological business dynamic. His support gave my plan a backbone of legitimacy. He had a small personal story that resonated. His own father had run a successful printing press, but his uncle, the sales guy, had nearly driven it into the ground by making lavish promises, and then using company funds to entertain clients on trips to Vegas. David had had to step in as a young lawyer to legally restructure the company and push his own uncle out to save his father's life's work. "Sometimes, Zach," he told me, "the most loyal thing you can do for a legacy is to protect it from the people who are supposed to be its stewards." With David's guidance, I didn't just form a shell company, we built a fortress. Miller Built Solutions wasn't just a name on a piece of paper. David helped me draft an operating agreement that was airtight. We secured a substantial line of credit from a bank where I had a long-standing personal relationship, a relationship built on years of my own impeccable financial history, separate from the increasingly messy books of Miller and Sons. I didn't just replicate the Pinnacle Point permit application, I improved it. I added a more detailed environmental mitigation plan and a revised construction schedule that was actually more efficient, something I'd been wanting to do for months, but was told by Owen was too rigid and stifled creative flexibility. The hardest part was keeping it all secret. I was living a double life. During the day, I was Zachary Miller, COO of Miller & Sons, playing my part, biting my tongue as Owen talked about the synergy we would achieve at Pinnacle Point. At night, I was Zachary Miller, CEO of Miller Built Solutions, working with David, poring over legal documents, and building my escape route. The secret gave me a strange sense of calm. The anger and resentment that had been my constant companions for years began to fade, replaced by a cold, clear focus. I was no longer a victim of my family's dysfunction. I was an architect of my own future. I was taking control. The final piece of the puzzle was the people. I couldn't just assume they would follow me. Their loyalty had to be earned, not demanded, and I couldn't risk tipping my hand, so I started having quiet conversations. I took Miguel out for lunch, not as his boss, but as a friend. I asked him about his family, his own plans for the future. I listened as he vented his frustrations, quietly and respectfully, about the disorganization, the last-minute changes, the feeling that the front office was disconnected from the reality of the worksite. He never mentioned Owen by name, but he didn't have to. "It just feels," he said, stirring his coffee, "like we're always fixing things instead of building them right the first time. It's not the way your grandfather ran things." I just nodded. "I know, Miguel. I know. I just want you to know that I appreciate you, and I'll always have your back." It was a simple statement, but it was the truth, and he knew it. I had a similar conversation with Sarah, the office manager. I asked for her help in organizing some old files, and we ended up talking for an hour about the inefficiencies she had to deal with every day. She showed me a folder full of unpaid invoices from vendors Owen had hired for his creative projects and then forgotten to submit the paperwork for. She was the one who had to smooth things over with them, protecting the company's credit rating while Owen was out networking. I looked at the folder, then I looked at her. "Sarah, you're the glue that holds this place together. I hope you know that." Tears welled up in her eyes. "No one's ever said that to me before," she whispered. "I wasn't making promises or trying to poach them, not yet. I was simply acknowledging their value, a value that my father and brother had been blind to for years. I was laying the groundwork, not with offers of money, but with the currency they valued most: respect." My plan was no longer just about saving a project, or even my own career. It was about creating a place where good people could do good work without being dragged down by the dead weight of incompetence and ego. Miller & Sons was my family's legacy, but it had become a diseased limb, and I was finally ready to amputate. The first panicked call came later that evening, not from Owen, but from my father. His voice, usually so full of booming confidence, was tight with a mixture of anger and fear. "Zachary, what the hell is going on? Owen is here, and he's talking nonsense about the Pinnacle permits being rejected. He said, you told him to handle it. I need you to get down to the city first thing in the morning and sort this out." I was in my own kitchen, looking out at the dark yard, a glass of water in my hand. I let him finish, the silence stretching after his demand. "There's nothing to sort out, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level. "The filing deadline passed. The application from Miller & Sons was incomplete and was rejected. It's over." "Orber, what do you mean, it's over? It's $100 million project. You don't just let it be over. You're the chief operating officer, for God's sake. It's your job to operate." "My job," I replied, the cold clarity still perfectly in place, "was to oversee operations. You personally took the single most critical piece of pre-construction logistics and handed it to Owen. You told me to let him handle it, to give him the responsibility. You did that. He failed. This is the result." There was a sputtering on the other end of the line. "This is not the time to be pointing fingers, Zachary. This is a family crisis. We need to pull together. We've been pulling together for a decade, Dad," I said, and the words came out without heat, just as a statement of fact. "I've been pulling Owen's weight, your weight, the weight of this entire company, and I'm done. The project, as far as Miller & Sons is concerned, is dead." I heard Owen's voice in the background, a high-pitched whining sound. My father came back on the line, his tone shifting from anger to a kind of desperate pleading. Son, the investors, they're going to sue us into oblivion. We'll lose everything. The house, the business your grandfather built. Yes, I said. That's what happens when you default on a contract of this magnitude. These are the consequences. He was speechless. He'd expected me to cave, to offer a solution, to say, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll fix it." The idea that I would simply state the grim reality and offer nothing was so alien to our dynamic that he couldn't process it. "I don't understand your attitude," he finally managed to say. "This is your family. This is your name on the door too, is it?" I asked. A genuine question. It always felt more like I was just a tool you used to clean up Owen's messes. A tool you're now finding isn't in the toolbox anymore. I didn't wait for a reply. I just said, "I have to go, Dad." And I hung up the phone. The next morning, the real panic began. Owen started calling my cell phone. I ignored the first 3 calls. On the 4th, I picked up and just listened. It was a torrent of panicked, incoherent babbling. "Zach, you have to help me. The investors, they're calling a meeting for this afternoon. They want a full accounting of what happened." "What do I tell them?" "You have to be there with me. You have to explain it." "Explain what, Owen?" I asked, my voice calm. "I don't know. The technical stuff, the permit codes, the zoning variants, all the crap you understand. I can't talk to them about that. They'll eat me alive." "You wanted the responsibility," I said. "You told Dad you had it under control. You're the visionary. Go have a vision." "This isn't funny, Zach," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is our whole future." "No, Owen," I corrected him gently. "It was my future you were gambling with, and you lost." I hung up. The aha moment for them hadn't even happened yet. They were still operating under the assumption that the project was simply gone, lost to everyone. They were in damage control mode, trying to figure out how to survive the implosion. The idea that I had not only protected myself, but had seized the opportunity for my own gain, hadn't yet entered their minds. They were so used to me being the selfless fixer, that the alternative was unthinkable. Around noon, I got a text from Sarah, the office manager. It just said, "They're in the main conference room. Your dad, Owen, and 2 lawyers I've never seen before. They look grim." A few minutes later, another text. "They just pulled the full financial records for the last 5 years." I knew what they were looking for. They were trying to find a way to pin the financial liability on me. They would be searching for some email where I'd said I would check on the permits, some line item in a budget that they could twist to mean I had accepted ultimate responsibility. They would find nothing. For the last 6 months, since my father had officially handed the task to Owen, I had been meticulous in my communication. Every email I sent regarding Pinnacle Point CC, both of them, and contained phrases like, "Owen, following up on your progress with the permit submission," or "Owen, let me know when you have confirmation from the city so I can schedule the surveyors." I had created a paper trail of their responsibility that was a mile long and irrefutable. My lawyer David had coached me on it. "Create a record of delegation," he'd said. "Make it so clear that a first-year law student could win the case." The investor meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. at their downtown offices. At 2:45 p.m., I was sitting in the lobby of that same building. I was wearing my best suit. In my hand was a leather-bound portfolio. Inside was a single document, the officially issued and stamped Pinnacle Point development permit, bearing the name Miller Built Solutions, LLC. Owen and my father came out of the elevator, looking like they were walking to their own execution. Owen's face was ashen, his suit rumpled. My father had aged 10 years in a day. His usual proud posture was gone, replaced by a defeated slump. They saw me sitting there, and a flicker of hope, of desperate, pathetic hope, crossed their faces. Owen rushed over. "Zach, thank God. You came. You're going to help us, right? You're going to explain." "I'm not here with you, Owen," I said, cutting him off without even looking at him. I stood up as the receptionist called my name. "Zachary Miller, Mr. Caldwell will see you now." I walked past them, past their stunned and confused faces,
and went through the frosted glass doors into the main boardroom. The head investor, a formidable man named Marcus Caldwell, and his team were sitting at a long table. They looked at me, then at the door where my father and brother were still standing, looking lost. "Mr. Miller," Caldwell said, his voice a low rumble, "we were just about to meet with your family to discuss the catastrophic failure of your company to secure the Pinnacle Point permits. I must admit, I'm surprised to see you here, Mr. Caldwell," I said, placing my portfolio on the polished table. "I'm not here to talk about the failure of Miller and Sons." I opened the portfolio and slid the permit across the table to him. "I'm here to talk about the future of the Pinnacle Point project." Caldwell picked up the document. His sharp eyes scanned the page, his expression shifting from stern curiosity to outright shock. He looked at the official city seal, the project number, the approval stamps, and then at the name at the bottom. "Miller Built Solutions LLC," he read aloud. He looked up at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I think you'd better have a seat and tell me everything." The scene in that boardroom was something I'll play back in my mind for the rest of my life. As I sat down, Caldwell gestured to his assistant, who quietly but firmly shut the door, leaving my father and Owen standing in the hallway, their faces pressed against the glass like lost children. They watched as I calmly and methodically walked Caldwell and his team through the situation. I didn't present it as a family drama. I presented it as a business continuity plan. Miller and Sons, as you've unfortunately discovered, has suffered a catastrophic failure of management. I began, my voice steady. The entity you had a contract with is no longer capable of executing the project. They have defaulted. However, the project itself, its assets, the plans, the engineering, the feasibility studies, and most importantly, the permits are secure. They are held by a new, stable, and competently managed entity. I slid a second folder across the table. "This is the corporate book for Miller Built Solutions. You'll find our certificate of incorporation, a statement of our secured line of credit, which is more than sufficient to cover the initial phases of construction, and a list of our key personnel." Caldwell opened the folder. His eyebrows shot up as he saw the credit line figure. He then turned to the personnel list. Miguel Vargas as head of construction, Sarah Jenkins as director of operations. "These are your father's best people. They are the best people, period." I corrected him gently. "And their loyalty isn't to a name on a truck. It's to getting the job done right. They've already tendered their resignations from Miller and Sons, and have signed on with me, effective immediately." This was the final, decisive blow, and I'd timed it perfectly. Just an hour before this meeting, I had held my own separate meeting at a coffee shop near our main yard. I'd gathered Miguel, Sarah, and our top 3 crew leads, the master electrician, the lead carpenter, and the head plumber. I laid out the entire situation, the failed permits, the impending bankruptcy of Miller and Sons, and the existence of Miller Built Solutions. I showed them the approved permit.
There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Miguel, a man of few words, looked at the permit, then looked at me, and a slow grin spread across his face. "So the job is still on," he said. "It wasn't a question. The job is on," I confirmed. "But it's with a new company. My company. One where the person in charge of the site is also the person in charge of the business. No more last-minute changes from someone who's never worn a tool belt. No more excuses. Just work." Sarah was the one who voiced the question in everyone's eyes. "What about your father and Owen?" "They made their choices," I said simply. "They chose to put the company's future in the hands of someone who wasn't qualified, and now they have to live with the consequences. I'm choosing to save the work and the people who do it. I can't offer you the security of a 30-year-old company name anymore. In fact, I'm asking you to take a risk with me, but I can promise you this. With Miller Built, you will be respected, you will be valued, and you will never have to apologize for someone else's incompetence again." I slid employment contracts across the table to each of them. They offered a 10% raise over their current salaries and a small stake in a profit-sharing plan. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about the principle. They looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. A decade of shared frustrations and quiet camaraderie, culminating in this single moment. Miguel picked up a pen and signed his contract without even reading the fine print. The others followed suit immediately. The exodus had begun. Back in Caldwell's boardroom, the full weight of this hit home. He wasn't just looking at a guy who had cleverly secured a permit. He was looking at a man who had, in the course of a single afternoon, lifted the entire operational capacity of one company and seamlessly transferred it to another. I hadn't just built a lifeboat. I'd built a new ship and convinced the all-star crew to jump aboard before the old one even knew it was sinking. Caldwell leaned back, a look of genuine admiration in his eyes. He looked over at the glass door, where Owen was now frantically banging, his face red and contorted with rage, while my father stood behind him, looking utterly broken. "So let me get this straight," Caldwell said, turning back to me. "Your family's company is about to be sued into non-existence by us, for the default. Meanwhile, you're offering us a turnkey solution to the problem they created, with the same project, better financing, the same expert crew, and a leader who's proven he's 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Your brother loses everything, your father loses his legacy, and you get the whole damn thing." "That's a fair summary," I said. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's the most ruthless, brilliant thing I've seen in this business in 20 years. He slid the permit back across the table to me. "We're not interested in suing a bankrupt company for pennies on the dollar. We're interested in building a hotel. Draw up a new contract between Pinnacle Point Investors and Miller Built Solutions. Have your lawyer send it to our legal team by morning. We're back on schedule." As I stood up to leave, he said one more thing. "Mr. Miller, a word of advice. When you get to the top, remember how you got there. Never ever tolerate incompetence in your inner circle. It's a cancer." "I don't think that will be a problem," I said. I walked out of the boardroom and past my family without a word. Owen screamed at me, calling me a snake, a traitor, a backstabber. My father just looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain and confusion so deep, I almost felt a flicker of pity, almost. But then I remembered all the years of being dismissed, of being the silent fixer, the reliable mule. This wasn't a betrayal, it was an emancipation. I didn't say a word. I just walked to the elevator, pushed the button, and rode down to my new life, leaving them behind with the ruins they had built for themselves. The final confrontation didn't happen in a boardroom or an office. It happened where it all began, our family home. A week after the investor meeting, I received a summons, not a legal one, but a text from my mother. "Please come for dinner, your father wants to talk." I knew what it was. It was the last-ditch effort, the appeal to sentiment, the final attempt to use the bonds of family as a leash. I almost didn't go. My lawyer, David, advised against it. "There's nothing left to say, Zach. You won." But I knew I had to go. I had to close the book, not just for them, but for me. I needed to stand in that house, in the place where the dynamic was first forged, and prove to myself that it no longer had any power over me. I walked in, and the atmosphere was thick with a funereal gloom. My mother gave me a tight, tearful hug, whispering, "How could you do this to them?" Owen was sitting on the sofa, staring at the floor, looking like a hollowed-out version of himself. My father was in his armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a mask of weary anger. He gestured for me to sit. "I think," my father began, his voice raspy, "you owe us an explanation." I sat down, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play I already knew the ending to. "An explanation for what exactly?" I asked calmly. "For being competent, for protecting my own future, for ensuring that $100 million project didn't go up in smoke because of negligence. You stole it." Owen suddenly erupted, his voice cracking. "You stole my project." I actually laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, just one of pure unadulterated disbelief. "Your project, Owen. Was it your project when you ordered the wrong marble? Was it your project when you messed up the payroll? Was it your project when you promised a client a timeline that was literally impossible? The only thing you've ever contributed to any project is chaos. I was the one who turned that chaos into something real, every single time." He was learning. My father shot back, pointing a trembling finger at me. A son is supposed to have a chance to learn from his mistakes, not have his brother crucify him for them. "He's 32 years old, Dad,"
Ed said.
my voice dropping, becoming cold and sharp as a shard of glass. He's not a child learning to ride a bike. He's a man who was given a sacred responsibility to the family, to our employees, to our investors, and he treated it like a joke. He didn't make a mistake, he made a habit, a career of it, and you enabled him every step of the way. You praised his visions while I was working until 3 a.m., cleaning up the debris he left behind. I leaned forward, looking my father directly in the eye. Let me tell you what I did. For the last 10 years, I have kept a private log, a detailed record of every single one of Owen's creative blunders and little mistakes. I have the receipts for the wrong materials. I have the emails from the angry clients. I have the overtime logs from the nights I had to spend fixing his messes. I have a spreadsheet that calculates, down to the dollar, exactly how much his weaponized incompetence has cost this company. The total over a decade is just shy of $1.7 million. That's not a learning curve, Dad. That's a black hole. The room was utterly silent. Owen's face had gone from red to a pasty white. My father looked like he'd been punched in the gut. They had no idea. They thought my quiet fixing was a sign of my compliance, my acceptance of the family hierarchy. They never imagined it was also an act of meticulous documentation. My secret weapon wasn't just my foresight with the permits, it was a decade's worth of evidence. You were building a case against us, my mother whispered, horrified. I was building a lifeboat, I corrected her. I knew this day was coming. I knew that one day Owen would make a mistake so big that I couldn't fix it, one that would sink the whole ship, and I decided I wasn't going to go down with it. The Pinnacle Point permit was that mistake. I saw it coming the moment Dad gave him the job, so I acted. I didn't steal anything. I created a new viable company. I secured the necessary legal instruments, and I offered a home to the people who actually made Miller and Sons work. The people you two treated like props. Miguel, Sarah, the crews. They didn't follow me because I'm a traitor. They followed me because for the first time, someone valued their competence more than a family name. My father finally broke. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a profound shaking sorrow. But it's your name too, Zach. Miller and Sons. It was supposed to be for both of you. Your grandfather, Granddad would be ashamed, I said.
She'd.
My voice softening slightly, but losing none of its conviction. He would be ashamed that you valued charm over substance, talk over work. He built that company with his bare hands, on a foundation of reliability and trust, a foundation you and Owen systematically dismantled. Miller and Sons is a hollowed-out shell. You know why? Because the value was never in the name, it was in the work, and the work just walked out the door with me. I stood up. Miller Built Solutions is breaking ground on the Pinnacle Point site on Monday morning. I'm hiring. I need another 30 skilled workers, and 2 more project managers. Miller and Sons, from what I hear, is declaring Chapter 7 bankruptcy on Friday. You won't lose the house. I made sure my lawyer structured the new contract with Caldwell in a way that indemnifies you personally from the lawsuit, provided you dissolve the company peacefully. Consider it my last act of fixing things for you. I walked to the door. Owen was just sitting there, a broken man, staring into the abyss of a future where he would actually be held accountable for his own actions. My father didn't look at me. He just stared into his whiskey. My mother followed me to the entryway. Is this it, Zachary? Is this the end of our family? I turned to her, and for the first time, I felt a pang of genuine sadness, not for them, but for what could have been. The family I cared about, I said, thinking of Miguel and Sarah, and the crews, is just getting started on a new and very profitable venture. The one in this house ended a long time ago. I just finally stopped pretending it hadn't, and with that, I walked out, leaving the ghosts of Miller and Sons behind me for good. So here we are. It's been 6 months. Miller Built Solutions is not just surviving, it's thriving. The Pinnacle Point project is ahead of schedule and under budget. The hotel is framed, the glass is going in, and it looks magnificent against the skyline. The investors are so pleased, they've already approached me about 2 other developments. My crews are happy. They work hard, they get paid well, and there's a sense of pride and calm on our job sites
that I haven't felt in years. Sarah is my official COO, and she runs the business with an efficiency that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. Miguel is a partner, a title he earned 100 times over. We're not just building structures, we're building a culture of competence, a place where your contribution is what defines you, not your last name. As for Miller and Sons, it's gone. The bankruptcy went through, a quiet, undignified end to a 40-year legacy. The trucks and old equipment were auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. The name that my father was so proud of now only exists on a pile of legal documents in a dusty archive. My father and mother sold the large family home and downsized to a small condo. I hear he's having a hard time. He lost his company, his status, and in his eyes, both of his sons. Owen's fate is, I suppose, the very definition of karmic payoff. With no company to fund his lifestyle, and no big brother to clean up his messes, reality hit him like a ton of bricks. His creative mind doesn't pay the rent. His charm doesn't work on landlords or bank managers. The last I heard, he was working a retail job, selling high-end audio equipment. I imagine he's very good at talking about the vision of a perfect sound system, but probably not so good at processing the credit card payments correctly. He has to explain to our father, and to himself, why his name was the only one on the failed project that sunk the entire ship. There are no more safety nets. Sometimes, when I'm standing on the top floor of the Pinnacle Point site, looking out over the city, I think about what I did. Was it revenge? I don't think so. Revenge is emotional. It's about inflicting pain for pain's sake. What I did was colder, more logical than that. It was surgery. It was the calculated, precise removal of a diseased part to save the whole. My family saw the business as an extension of their egos, a thing that was supposed to serve them. I saw it as a living entity, an ecosystem of people, and plans and promises, and it was my duty to protect it, even if it meant protecting it from them. They underestimated me. That was their fatal flaw. They saw the quiet, reliable son who always fixed things, and they mistook my patience for weakness. They mistook my silence for acceptance. They never once thought that the guy who could meticulously plan a multi-million-dollar construction project might also be capable of meticulously planning his own liberation. They saw a workhorse, and they never bothered to check if he was also a racehorse, just waiting for the right track. So I'll ask you again, was I the jerk for methodically dismantling my family's business to save my own future and the livelihoods of the people who depended on me? Did I betray my family? Or did I simply refuse to be their final victim? I built my success on the ruins of their failure, a failure they authored themselves. And to be honest, I sleep pretty well at night. But I'm curious, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever been in a situation where you were the only one holding things together, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about taking back your power. Thanks for listening.